All right, so get ready, because today we're going to be exploring some really fascinating ancient practices.
Oh,
We're diving deep dive into Leviticus 15.
okay.
This chapter, it gets into bodily discharges and this whole concept of like ritual purity in ancient Israel.
Interesting.
We're talking detailed rituals for everything.
Oh, wow.
Everything from, well, let's just say unexpected leaks to, periods.
It's really interesting how all these like bodily functions that, we might just see as biology today, were like so deeply intertwined with this idea of spiritual purity and sanctity, in ancient Israel.
Yeah, and Leviticus 15, it outlines, a number of specific bodily discharges that would make someone, quote unquote, unclean.
Right.
And it's things like semen, menstrual blood, unusual flows, and even discharges that stem from like unspecified ailments, particularly in men. Oh. And what's interesting to me is that this whole idea of uncleanliness, it wasn't just about hygiene, but it was more about ritual purity and how that affected, your ability to like participate in religious activities.
Yeah.
Or even interact with other people.
Exactly. And the text, it like doesn't shy away from specifics at all. Like it lays out a whole system for managing these states of like ritual impurity.
Yeah.
You've got instructions for washing, periods of isolation, and even cleansing objects like furniture and clothing that came into contact with the person who's considered, quote unquote, unclean.
When I was reading through this, I was really struck by how even the mode of transportation that's used by someone considered unclean also becomes unclean.
Right.
Like it's this ripple effect of impurity.
Yeah, it really highlights how seriously they took this whole idea of ritual purity.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a personal thing. It was really about maintaining the sanctity of the whole community. And very importantly, the tabernacle, which was considered, the dwelling place of God.
Okay, so both men and women have these specific rituals, outlined for them, but it wasn't like a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, not at all.
Can we unpack that a little bit? Like, what stands out to you about how Leviticus 15 addresses gender and this whole idea of ritual purity?
Well, what I find really interesting is how menstruation is treated in this context.
Yeah.
It's not really portrayed as like inherently shameful or dirty.
Right.
But it does necessitate this like specific process of purification.
Okay.
And the text is very like matter of fact about it.
Yeah, it does make you wonder how these ancient ideas compare to our modern concepts of like hygiene and morality.
Right.
But before we go there, I'd love to just dig a little deeper into this whole purification process.
Okay.
So Leviticus 15 talks about atonement, right? After the period of uncleanliness.
Yeah.
And it often involves offerings like turtle doves or pigeons.
Right.
What's the significance of that?
So these offerings, they weren't just like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They were really deeply symbolic acts.
Okay.
That were aimed at like restoring a harmonious relationship with God. A relationship that, according to Leviticus, was like essential for the well-being of, both the individual and the community as a whole.
Yeah, so there's this like inherent connection between ritual purity and being able to, approach the divine. It's not just about saying sorry, but it's about actively restoring that, quote unquote, right relationship with God.
Exactly.
Can you elaborate on like why that right relationship was so important in their worldview? Like what did it enable, and were there any consequences for not having that right relationship?
Sure. So according to Leviticus, having a right relationship with God, it brought blessings, protection, and prosperity to individuals in the community. But without it, they believed that they were vulnerable to, misfortune, illness, and even like divine judgment.
That adds another layer to this whole concept of uncleanliness, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just about physical impurity.
Right.
It had like real world implications for how they lived their lives.
Exactly. And the tabernacle, as God's dwelling place, played a like central role in all of this. Maintaining its sanctity was really important to ensuring continued divine favor.
So speaking of the tabernacle, I'm curious to know more about like how the ancient Israelites perceived it, what made it so sacred in their eyes, and like what role did it play in their daily lives?
Well, the tabernacle, it was more than just a building. It was really seen as this point where heaven and earth met.
Oh, wow.
It housed the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
Which contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments, symbolizing, God's presence and his covenant with his people. And their whole system of worship revolved around the tabernacle.
Okay.
It was like the focal point of their religious life.
So maintaining the ritual purity of individuals and the community was basically like safeguarding that sacred space. It wasn't just about personal hygiene, but it was about upholding this much larger, almost like a cosmic order.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Everything was interconnected.
Yeah.
Maintaining ritual purity was really key to like sustaining their relationship with the divine and ensuring the well-being of the whole community.
This idea of like a ripple effect of, individual actions impacting the community and the sacred is, it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Leviticus also goes into a lot of detail about the specific types of offerings involved in atonement. Can we break down some of those specifics and their symbolic meanings? Like, what were the differences, for example, between like a sin offering and a burnt offering, and how did they relate to restoring that right relationship with God?
Okay, so the different types of offerings, they each had their own unique purposes and symbolism, which added like layers of meaning to the act of atonement.
Okay.
For example, a sin offering, often involving a male goat, was specifically for unintentional sins.
Okay.
It focused on purification from wrongdoing. But a burnt offering, on the other hand, typically involved a male lamb.
Uh-huh.
It was like a symbol of complete surrender and dedication to God.
So it wasn't just a case of like offering up any animal.
Right, exactly.
It was meticulously categorized to align with the specific transgression and the desired outcome. It's almost like a nuanced language of atonement, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And understanding this language is really key to unlocking the deeper significance of all these rituals. It reveals this like really complex and nuanced system of belief that like permeated every aspect of their lives.
We've talked about how both men and women have specific rituals outlined for them, but I'd like to spend some time focusing specifically on the rituals surrounding menstruation.
Okay.
Leviticus doesn't shy away from the specifics, does it? Can you walk us through like what the text says and what we can learn from its approach?
It certainly does not. So Leviticus 15 outlines that a woman would separate herself for 7 days during her menstrual cycle, and any cloth or object that she sat on during that time would also become unclean and require washing.
That level of detail, it really underscores how ingrained like these purity practices were in their like everyday lives, right? It wasn't just about, a quick wash. It involved this really conscious effort to like maintain this state of ritual purity. But, I think it'd be good to maybe like shift gears a little bit and explore like why these practices held such importance for the ancient Israelites.
Yeah, absolutely. To understand that, we have to kind of consider their worldview, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for them, the idea of holiness was like paramount to their relationship with God. They believed that maintaining ritual purity, both individually and collectively, was like essential to, staying in God's favor.
So it wasn't just about cleanliness in the physical sense, but it was about a deep, I guess you could say, like spiritual purity. Would you say it was about like being worthy to approach God? Precisely. And this sense of holiness, like extended outwards, encompassing not just individuals, but the entire community.
Right.
And of course, the tabernacle, God's dwelling place.
Yeah.
Maintaining ritual purity was like crucial for preserving the sanctity of those spaces.
Yeah.
And ensuring harmony within the community as well.
So it's like a ripple effect then.
Exactly.
Individual purity kind of like contributes to the purity of the community, which in turn like safeguards the sanctity of that sacred space. It's like this almost like a holistic understanding of purity, right?
Exactly. And it's fascinating how Leviticus 15, while focusing on like very specific bodily functions, actually offers us like a window into this much larger system of belief and practice.
That's what makes these deep dives so rewarding, right? You start with what seems like a very specific topic, but it opens up all these, avenues for exploring these broader themes and questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, how did these ancient ideas about purity compare to like our modern concepts of, hygiene and morality?
Right.
I mean, they might seem strange to us now, but I'm sure there are like some valuable insights that we can, we can glean from them. What do you think?
Absolutely. While we may not like follow those specific rituals today,
right,
they offer some universal themes that still resonate with us.
Yeah.
The emphasis on ritual, for instance.
Okay.
It reminds us of the the power of intentionality and mindfulness in our own lives, you know?
Yeah.
And the whole concept of like community purity highlights the importance of, you know, shared responsibility and the interconnectedness of our actions.
It's thought-provoking, isn't it?
Yeah.
What if we had like similar rituals today, even if they weren't, you know, tied to these specific bodily functions? How might they shape our social interactions or our relationships with our bodies, or even like our understanding of illness?
Those are great questions. It challenges us to think about how, you know, we create boundaries and maintain a sense of, you know, sacredness in our own lives. Maybe we could even learn from the way that Leviticus frames, you know, these bodily functions, not as sources of shame, but as like natural processes that require specific rituals for like reintegration and renewal.
That's a really interesting point. There's like no sense of judgment or punishment in Leviticus 15.
Right.
It's more about like acknowledging the impact of these experiences, and it provides like a pathway back to a state of, you know, wholeness.
Yes, and that shift in perspective can be, you know, quite powerful.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing these experiences as something to be like hidden or feared, they become these opportunities for, you know, ritual cleansing and spiritual renewal.
It's almost like a reframing, right? Taking something that might be seen as, you know, negative or taboo, and like imbuing it with a sense of sacredness and purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a valuable lesson that I think we can take from Leviticus 15.
Yeah.
Even if we don't, you know, adhere to the specific details of those ancient practices. It encourages us to find meaning in the full spectrum of human experience.
Right. Yeah.
Even the messy and unpredictable parts.
That reminds me of something mentioned earlier about, you know, the different types of offerings and their specific symbolism. We talked about like the sin offering and the burnt offering, but I'm curious about some of the other offerings that are mentioned in Leviticus 15, specifically those related to purification rituals. Can you shed some light on those?
Of course. So in addition to the sin offerings and the burnt offerings, Leviticus 15 also mentions something called the guilt offering.
Okay.
And this specific offering was for when someone unintentionally violated a sacred rite or committed a sin that required restitution.
Okay.
For example, like if someone unknowingly used something that belonged to the sanctuary, they would then need to make a guilt offering to atone for their transgression.
So there were like different levels of offerings, each addressing a specific, you know, type of transgression. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
It was about like acknowledging the nature of the act and taking those appropriate steps to like restore balance and harmony.
Exactly. And this, you know, this highlights another like crucial aspect of the ancient Israelite belief system, the concept of justice and accountability. Even like unintentional transgressions had consequences and required atonement.
It's like they were striving to maintain this like certain cosmic order.
Right.
And these rituals were a tangible way of like realigning themselves with that order. But let's go back to menstruation for a moment.
Okay.
You mentioned that the text doesn't like present it as inherently shameful.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Like how did they view this like natural biological process within the framework of ritual purity?
That's a really important point. Unlike like some other ancient cultures that viewed menstruation as like taboo or polluting.
Right.
Leviticus presents it as this natural process.
Yeah.
That requires a specific period of separation and purification.
Okay.
The focus isn't on shame or guilt, but rather on restoring ritual purity after this period of separation.
It's interesting that Leviticus, you know, which is often associated with these like very strict rules and regulations, actually offers like a more nuanced perspective on menstruation than, you know, we might expect.
Absolutely.
It's not about like suppressing or stigmatizing this, you know, natural process.
Right.
But it's about, you know, integrating it into their system of ritual purity.
It's certainly, you know, it challenges like our preconceived notions about ancient attitudes towards women and their bodies.
Yeah.
And it raises some fascinating questions about how these practices might have shaped their social dynamics.
Right.
And understanding of, you know, gender roles.
I'm also curious about the specific details of the purification rituals for women that are, you know, described in Leviticus 15. Can you walk us through those? Like what steps did a woman need to take after, you know, her period of separation to be considered ritually pure again.
Okay, so after the 7 days of separation, the woman would bathe.
Okay.
And wash her clothes.
Right. Yeah.
Then on the 8th day, she would bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting.
Wait, so even after bathing and washing her clothes, she still needed to make an offering?
Yes, the offering was like an essential part of that purification process.
Okay.
It signified the final step in restoring her ritual purity and allowing her to, fully reintegrate back into the community.
What's the significance of offering turtle doves or pigeons? Why those specific birds?
Well, turtle doves and pigeons were considered like affordable offerings.
Oh, okay.
They were accessible to even like the poorest members of society. Mm-hmm. And this emphasizes that the ability to, approach God and restore ritual purity wasn't limited to just the wealthy or the elite.
That's a really interesting detail. It suggests this system of ritual purity that, while meticulously structured, also took into account like the realities of different social classes.
Absolutely, and this further underscores the importance of understanding these practices within their historical and cultural context.
We've talked a lot about like the rituals themselves, but I'd love to delve a little deeper into like the theological implications of Leviticus 15. Okay. What does this chapter reveal about the ancient Israelite understanding of like God, humanity, and the relationship between between them?
Well, Leviticus 15, it paints this picture of a God who's deeply concerned with the purity and holiness of his people. Mm-hmm. And it's not about like punishing them for their bodily functions. It's about providing a way for them to maintain this right relationship with them.
So these rituals were kind of like a way of bridging the gap between like the sacred and the profane, the divine and the human.
Exactly. And they highlight the importance of ritual and ceremony in mediating that relationship.
It's fascinating how a chapter that starts with, what seems like these like mundane details about bodily discharges actually opens up this, this window into these like really profound theological concepts.
It certainly does. And it reminds us that even the most like seemingly ordinary aspects of human experience can be imbued with spiritual significance.
This has been a really insightful conversation. You've managed to like weave together these specific details of Leviticus 15 with these broader themes of ritual purity and this whole human relationship with the divine.
It's been a pleasure exploring all these fascinating concepts with you.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From, the specifics of the purification rituals to, the broader implications of ritual purity in ancient Israelite society. But before we wrap up, I'd like to leave our listeners with, one final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
So imagine if we, in modern society, had specific rituals for, navigating moments of transition or vulnerability. Not necessarily the same ones outlined in Leviticus, but rituals nonetheless.
Right.
How might that shape our individual experiences and our collective understanding of these events?
That's a brilliant question to ponder. It challenges us to consider how we create meaning and structure around these inevitable aspects of human experience.
Right.
Maybe we can learn from the ancient Israelites who, despite their seemingly rigid system, recognized the need for ritual and ceremony in navigating the complexities of life.
Yeah.
The body and the sacred.
So as we surface from this deep dive into Leviticus 15, I hope you'll carry these insights with you.
Yeah.
Challenge your assumptions. Consider the power of ritual and embrace the interconnectedness of our human experience. And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to create your own, modern day rituals for navigating life's inevitable transitions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Well, that's a complex question, and there's no simple answer. On the one hand, these rituals did kind of set women apart,
right,
during their menstrual cycle.
Uh-huh.
And that separation, could be seen as restrictive, I guess.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the fact that Leviticus, addresses menstruation so openly and matter-of-factly, without like attaching any kind of moral stigma to it.
Right.
That's really significant.
I see what you mean. It wasn't treated as something, shameful or dirty, but as this natural process that just required, a specific ritual response.
Exactly. And these rituals, while requiring separation, also provided like this structured way for women to kind of reintegrate back into the community after that period of isolation.
So it wasn't about exclusion. It was about a temporary like shift in their ritual status.
Right. Exactly. And it's important to remember that in ancient Israelite society, ritual purity was like paramount for everyone, not just women.
Yeah.
Men also had their own set of rituals and regulations related to, bodily discharges.
Right. That's a good point. It wasn't about like singling out women. It was about, maintaining this system of ritual purity that applied to all members of the community. But I'm still curious about how these rituals might have impacted like women's experiences and their social standing within the community. Did they hold any kind of like authority or influence within this system?
Well, we don't have a complete picture, of course.
Yeah.
But there are hints in the text that suggest that women weren't just, passively receiving these rituals.
Okay.
For example, they were the ones who were responsible for counting the days of their separation.
Oh, interesting.
And for bringing the offerings to the priest.
Okay, so they had like an active role in maintaining their own ritual purity.
Yes, and that suggests, a certain degree of agency within that system. It wasn't just something that was like imposed upon them. They had a responsibility to participate in the process.
It's also interesting to note that the offerings required for women's purification rituals, the turtle doves or pigeons, were considered like more accessible than some of the other offerings mentioned in Leviticus. Could that be seen as a way of kind of ensuring that all women, regardless of their, economic status, could participate in these rituals?
It's certainly possible. It suggests a concern for inclusivity within the system, ensuring that all women had the means to restore their ritual purity.
So while we can't definitively say whether, these rituals empowered or restricted women, it's clear that they had, a profound impact on their lives.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the enduring power of these ancient practices that we're still grappling with their implications, even today.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dives into Leviticus 15. We've explored the specific rituals, the underlying concept of ritual purity, and even the broader social and theological implications of these practices. But before we wrap up, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Imagine if we, in modern society, had specific rituals for navigating, moments of transition or vulnerability. Not necessarily the same ones outlined in Leviticus, but rituals, nonetheless.
Right.
How might that shape our individual experiences and our collective understanding of these events?
That's a brilliant question to ponder. It challenges us to consider how we create meaning and structure around these inevitable aspects of human experience.
Right.
Maybe we can learn from the ancient Israelites who, despite their seemingly rigid system, recognized the need for ritual and ceremony in navigating the complexities of life, the body, and the sacred.
So as we surface from this deep dive into Leviticus 15, I hope you'll carry these insights with you. Challenge your assumptions. Consider the power of ritual and embrace the interconnectedness of our human experience. And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to create your own, modern day rituals for navigating life's inevitable transitions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.